Hi everyone, this is Celine from Blue Calla Patterns and welcome to video part 3 of the Aster Handbag video tutorial. For this video you'll need to assemble certain pieces, your two assembled body panels, your exterior body panels, your assembled exterior side panels, and the bottom that you assembled in video 1. Now before we start, you're going to take your bottom piece and turn it so that it is wrong side facing up, and then grab a ruler and a pen, a fabric pen or any kind of pen, it doesn't matter. And at each corner you're going to measure 3/8 of an inch away from the edge and make a mark at 3/8 of an inch. So you rotate it and you do the same. So you should have 2 marks. And do this for all 4 corners of the bottom piece. And I'll show you in a bit why we are doing this. Okay, now take one of your exterior body panels, place it right side facing up, upside down, and then place your bottom so they are right sides together, and align one of the longer edges of the bottom piece with that bottom edge of your body piece and clip them together. Now, when you're sewing together, this is where the marks that you've just made, this is where they're important. You're going to start sewing right at the 3/8 of an inch mark that you made at one corner. You're going to start sewing here. You're going to back stitch a little, and then you're going to sew the pieces together all the way across until you get to the 3/8 of an inch mark that you made at this corner. You're going to stop sewing at that 3/8 of an inch mark, and you're going to back stitch again. So I'm going to go over to my machine. I'm going to sew these together. Okay, so I've sewn the bottom to the bottom edge of one of the body panels. Hopefully you can see my stitching. It starts at 3/8 of an inch from this edge, goes across, and then it stops 3/8 of an inch from this edge. Now you're going to repeat exactly the same thing to sew the bottom edge of your second body panel to the other longer edge of your bottom piece. And you're doing exactly the same thing and stopping and starting 3/8 of an inch from the edges, making sure that you're back stitching at the beginning and the end. Okay, so now I have both body panels sewn to the bottom, and we're going to do the same and sew the bottom edge of one of your side panels to one of the shorter sides of your bottom. And there will be little gaps here where your body panel isn't sewn to the bottom, and that's perfectly fine. That's exactly what you want. And when you're pinning, just make sure that ignore the body panel and just make sure that the corners of your bottom piece are lined up with the bottom corners of your side panels. And then you're going to do exactly the same. Follow these 3/8 of an inch marks that you made on your bottom piece and start sewing 3/8 of an inch from this corner, back stitch, sew all the way across, stop 3/8 of an inch from this corner, and then back stitch again. And then you're going to do the same and attach this remaining side panel to the other shorter end of your bottom piece. Okay, so if you've sewn this correctly, Your bag should look something like this at this stage. If you turn it over so you can see the wrong side and you're just looking at the bottom piece, you should now have a rectangle shape of stitching, and at the corners here your stitching should meet, but there's always a 3/8 of an inch gap all the way on around the exterior of the stitching. If your stitching doesn't meet perfectly at the corners, bring it back to your machine and keep sewing those pieces together until your stitching meets at the corners. Now, to sew up the sides, all you do, and you should have the ability to adjust here because your stitching hasn't gone all the way to the edges. So you will want to pin these sides together. And if you follow correct seam allowances, your side panels should be exactly the same height as your body panels. And then you go around and you do the same and you clip all of the side edges, right sides together. Okay, so I've clipped all the sides of my bag together. I'm just showing you from all angles so you can see what it looks like. Now I'm going to go over to my machine and I'm going to sew up all of all 4 side seams. I start from the top edge and then I go and I sew down to the corner. Make sure that you back stitch here where you're starting to sew. So all the way down, and then you're going to, once again, you're not going to sew all the way to the bottom. You're going to stop 3/8 of an inch from the corner. This is important because if you sew all the way down and then you turn your bag right side out, your corners are going to pucker weirdly and they will not look good. Okay, so I've sewn up the 4 sides of my bag, and once you've sewn them up, you just want to have a look at your corner and make sure that your stitching meets at each corner 3/8 of an inch away from the corners. Then you need a pair of very sharp scissors, and you are just going to trim down your seam allowance along all the seams, so your 4 side seams and then your bottom seams where you're attaching the bottom edges of your body panels and your side panels to the bottom piece of your bag. And then when you're done trimming the seam allowance, you just turn the exterior shell of your bag right side out. Okay, so all the seam allowance has been trimmed and I've turned the exterior shell of my bag so that it's right side facing out. Here's the view of the bottom, a view of one corner. And I'm just going to set this aside for now, and we're going to assemble our top panels. Okay, so now we're going to assemble the top panels. For this, you will need your 4 pieces that you've cut from Twist Lock Panel D pattern piece. I'm using the same navy cork. You'll also need both of your Twist Lock Panel Peltex pieces. You don't need this pattern piece to do this part. You only need it to cut. But you will need your Twist Lock Panel D pattern piece handy. I like to use my hole punch and punch out the holes for both magnetic snaps, and I also like to punch out the center hole for my turn lock. I will be showing you how I install a turn lock for this bag. Now, the first thing you need to do is mark the location of your magnetic snaps and your turn lock on only 2 of the 4 Twist Lock Panel D pieces. And so I'll just use the holes I punched as a guide. Okay, and then mark it on first one piece, and then the second piece. It's important to be really accurate because you want your snaps to close and for the top panel pieces to line up perfectly when you close your bag. So now what we're going to do is we're going to sew these sets together. Now, here's an important note. If you're using a very thick vinyl or a material that will not turn nicely, so what you'll want to do instead is to sew these together, wrong sides together, all the way around this top curved edge. You have to leave this bottom straight edge open, but you'll sew these together with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Go very slowly and be as precise as possible. And then you're going to trim the seam allowance down until there's only 1/8 of an inch left outside of the line of stitching. I'm going to sew these right sides together and turn them because the cork is thin enough that I can do that. So make sure that you're clipping a set where one top panel piece does not have your marks and one of them does have the marks. You don't want to put marks on the top panel pieces that will be facing the outside of your bag. So the side that shows when you're looking at your bag. I'm just going to clip these right sides together. And again, it's important to be really precise so that you have nice looking top panels. And then I'm going to take this over to my machine, and again I'm going to sew along the top curved edges, leaving the bottom edge open. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning of the end. And when you're doing this method where you're sewing them right sides together, you'll want to use the typical 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to finish clipping these together, and I'm going to go and sew together the top curved edges. Okay, so I've sewn my top panel pieces together, and I'm just going to take a very sharp pair of scissors and trim my seam allowance to 1/8 of an inch. Now, if you're using fabric for your top panels, the next step will be very easy. You just have to turn them right side out and then press the seam very carefully so you have a nice rounded top edge. But if you're using cork or vinyl like I am, it can be a little bit trickier. Okay, now I'm just going to turn this so it is right side facing out, and I'm just pushing at the seam because I can't press cork, so I'm just pushing outwards. Okay, and then you take one of your Peltex pieces and you insert it inside. Now, take your time when you're doing this step because the Peltex will actually help you to shape that top edge. And sometimes I find it helps if you sort of roll the seam between your fingers, between your fingertips. Okay, so I'm placing the Peltex all the way to the top, and then I clip. Now, if you're using fabric, it's easier. You just have to press and then insert the Peltex, and then you can also clip it in place like I'm doing right now. So you just go slowly and adjust and clip. Make sure that your Peltex reaches all the way to the top edge. And the reason why you want it to reach all the way to the top is because when we top stitch the panels, we want it to catch the Peltex in that top stitching. Okay, so I have one piece done, and I won't make you watch me do it with the second piece, but I'm now going to take this top panel piece over to my machine, and I'm just going to top stitch along the top rounded edge with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And again, you just take your time to make sure that your stitching is nice and even. Okay, so I have both top panels top stitched with the Peltex inside. Now I'm going to take the washer of my magnetic snap, and I'm going to place the center hole of the washer over one of the magnetic snap holes, and I am going to mark the location of my prongs, which is the two spaces on either side of the center hole. And I'm going to do that for all 4 magnetic snap marks. Now you're going to need to cut out these prong holes, and to do this you need to use a seam ripper. You can't I wouldn't use scissors, I would definitely use the seam ripper. And when you're cutting the hole for the prongs of your magnetic snaps, you want to only go through this first layer of cork or vinyl or fabric and the layer of Peltex, but you do not want to touch this exterior layer. You don't want to cut that layer. So there's one. Now if you're using fabric instead of cork or vinyl, you'll want to apply fray check to these holes that you're making, just so that your fabric doesn't fray. There we go. Now I'll just show you how to complete one half, and then you can do the other half. Now when you're installing the magnetic snaps, there is a male and a female half. You want to install the same half, so the same kind of either the male half or the female half, you want them to be identical on the same top panel. These are very strong magnets, and I'm having a very difficult time taking them apart. There we go. So I'm going to install the male halves on this top panel. So one on this side, and then I reach in and I place the washer. You don't need to add anything sturdy, because already your Peltex is quite sturdy. Okay. Now, if you're using fabric, I suggest that you place a little piece of tape or something over top of the washer so that your metal parts don't damage this exterior layer, which will show on the outside of your bag. Okay, and now you'll do exactly the same thing to install these two halves of your magnetic snap to the second top panel. So I'll pause the video and I'll finish installing these snaps, and then we'll install our turn lock. Okay, so I've completed the installation of my magnetic snaps, and now I'm going to install the turn lock. Now, to install the turn lock, decide if you have like one top panel that looks slightly better than the other, then make that the front of your bag, and you want to install the front part of your turn lock on that panel. This will be the back panel and this will be the front panel of your bag. Now, to make marks for your lock, what you need to do is take the back plate, and there's a center hole on it. You're going to put that center hole over the mark you made, and make sure that the back plate is parallel to the top edge here of your top panel so that you're not installing your lock crooked. And mark the location of the prongs for this portion of your turn lock. And then you do the same thing as you did for the magnetic snaps, and you use your seam ripper. You do not go through the back panel, the back piece. You only go through the top layer and the Peltex. Then you install your lock like so. You add the back plate, and then again, if you're using fabric for your top panels, you want to cover the metal parts to protect your fabric. Okay, so that part is installed. Now, to install the plates, you're going to, so the pieces do come with the protective coating. We're temporarily going to remove the coating from the back plate. The back plate is the one that has the hole, but also has two smaller holes on either side for the screws of your lock. And you want to center the mark that you made in the center of the larger hole in the middle. And then you need to draw out the opening that you need to cut out, and you also need to draw out the smaller holes on the side for the location of your screws. Okay, so that's what that looks like now. Now we need to cut out these holes. So the smaller holes, it's quite easy to cut those out because you just use a regular hole punch. And I usually just, to choose the size, I just go a tiny bit bigger than the diameter of the screw that you're going to be using. And to punch out the oblong shape in the middle, I actually purchased this set of punches. I think I purchased them on eBay, and they come in various shapes and sizes, and they are really fantastic for installing different kinds of locks. So I just happen to have one that is exactly the right shape and size for my turn lock for this middle hole. So I'm just going to pause the video, and I'm going to punch out these holes, but I'm going to turn off the sound so that you don't have to listen to all the hammering. I've cut out all the holes using my punches. So now I'm just going to place my top panel, make sure that my holes are in the right place and that they're big enough. One important thing, this is the front plate. So you want this to show on the exterior. And also when you're punching the holes, this is the only holes that you're punching in the top panels that will go through all of the layers. So I'm just placing this. You can kind of poke everything down between the spaces because you want it to be completely flat. And then you're going to take your top plate here. I mean, this is the back plate, sorry. And you're going to put a drop of glue in the holes where you're going to be adding your screws. And the glue is just to make sure that your screws don't come out at some point, which it has happened, believe me. And then place the screw. Second screw. Oops. If you've never seen this, this is the most amazing little screwdriver for installing hardware. It's called a teeny turner, and I love it. It has different bits, and I've never actually had to look for another screwdriver to install my hardware. It's always done the job, and it's nice and small, so it's easy to store. Okay, so I've got a little bit of glue on the top, but I'll clean that off with rubbing alcohol. Now, before I continue, I'm just going to put a piece of tape over the plate to protect it, if I can find my tape. Okay, I can't find it, so I will go find my tape, and I'm going to place a piece of tape just so that I protect the back plate. So now, if we test out our lock, you should have this go through, and your magnetic snaps are lined up. And now we just have to attach these top panels to the top edge of our bag. Okay, so I have my two top panels and I have the exterior of my bag. And I always like to look at both sides of my bag and pick the nicer side to be the front of my bag. I think I like this fabric placement best. So whichever side I decide is going to be the front of my bag, I install the front top panel, so that will be this one, and I just clip it to the top edge of my bag. And you want to make sure that you have the side of your top panel with the magnetic snaps showing. That should be facing out. So I'm going to clip this one to this side and then turn it around, and you're doing the same thing for the second top panel. And once again, make sure that your magnetic snaps and this part of your turn lock is facing the outside of your bag. And now I'm just going to go over to my machine, and I'm just going to baste the top panels to the top edge of my bag. And that's the end of this video. And in the next video, video 4, we'll be doing the lining assembly for the bag.